Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are.
Good morning, I'm John. I'm going to read some stuff. So our reading today comes from the Jesus story called Mark. It's found in chapter 5. This is the story of Jesus' work that continues as he heals a woman on the way to heal Jairus' daughter. So you've all heard this story. Let's read it again. Now there was a woman who'd been afflicted with a flow of blood for 12 years. She'd suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and spent everything she had, but found no relief. Instead, she'd gotten worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, telling herself, "If I just touch his clothes, I'll be cured." And right away, the spring of her blood dried up, and she sensed in her body that she had been healed of her suffering. But right away, Jesus clearly sensed in himself that power was going out of him, and he turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his students said to him, "You see this crowd pushing against you so hard, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he went on looking around to see which female had done this thing. But the woman, terrified and shaking, and knowing what had happened to her, came and threw herself at his feet and told him the whole truth. But he said to her, "Daughter, your trust has cured you. Be on your way in peace and be healthy after your suffering."
Hey everyone. There's been a lot going on. So let's take one of those big breaths together. I love doing it. So let's take a big breath in. And now. Thank you, God. So this last week, I met with one of my friends. His name is Jonathan. He's actually a pastor too. We went to seminary together. He works at First Presbyterian Church of Austin. He's probably there right now doing his thing this morning. Just a couple of miles that way. But he's my best friend from seminary. We stay in contact, and we actually meet every week. And we get lunch, and we will sit outside on a picnic table and talk about what does ministry look like. And usually it turns into us just like sharing stupid videos with each other and just laughing and being dumb. And that's kind of what all of our conversations turn to. But this last week, he asked me a question that was kind of a challenging question. That's also part of our relationship. We try to challenge each other, push each other, and we try to grow with each other. That's something that we do for one another. But he said, "Jacob, if we look at the world right now with, all of the stuff going on with war, with the pandemic, with climate change, with the threat of nuclear stuff kind of on the horizon, if the world was going to end, what would we do?" He's like, "If I could help people, how do we prepare if the world was going to end, if everyone was going to die, if people are going to die, how do we prepare?" This question got me thinking about all of the stuff in our life, all the crap in our life that we're dealing with because of the pandemic, but also all the stuff that would exist even if there wasn't a global health scare going on right now. I just thought about all of these traumas that we hold in our bodies from all of our lives, all the past crap that is still stuck with us. Because we've all felt a degree of great suffering at some point in our lives. Who knows? It could be from health stuff, from physical stuff. Can be anything, but all of us have had these great hurts. And so even if it isn't this big traumatic thing, we often have to face these small, what I'm going to call them small deaths, these times when we have to die. It's not just one final death at the end. There's many deaths throughout our life. And so whenever Jonathan asked me this question, is how do we prepare for death? I thought, well, we're kind of already doing that, right? So what is our response to this question? What do we do when the world is coming to an end? How do we prepare? How do we respond when things seem completely lost? My response to Jonathan last week was, I think we just keep doing what we're doing already, right? We're a people of stories, and we hold these sacred stories about trauma and pain. That's what all the stories about Jesus' work have been, all these really hard stories. And so I think we hold on to them and we keep telling them because they remind us that these sacred stories that we hear and grow up listening to and we hear every Sunday, they remind us that we get to take part in the same sacred story. And that sacred story always ends with resurrection and new life. Today our story is about the hemorrhaging woman, as they call her, the woman who has a bleeding issue, an issue of bleeding, as they will say. And she's not given a name because she's a woman in the Bible, and it's pretty crappy. So she's not given a name, and we're upset with that. I'm going to point that out anytime that happens. But this really is an interesting story because it's a healing story that's in the middle of another healing story. And so we actually talked about this healing story of Jairus' daughter. He was this religious elite. He was kind of one of the big Jewish guys, and he comes to Jesus and he falls at his feet and he begs him to heal his daughter who's on her deathbed. And he's going to go and heal her, and as we learned a couple weeks ago, he does heal her, he brings her back from life from the dead. He resurrects this 12-year-old girl. But on his way to do this, Jesus has this other healing encounter that kind of gets in the way, that causes him to rethink his journey. It makes him pause. And Jesus at this point is flooded by crowds. And this is kind of typical. The word is spreading all along. He's like, I don't want anyone to know about it, but everyone keeps finding out about it. And everyone wants to just touch him and learn from him and be healed by him. And this word is just spreading so fast, even though he's telling everyone, don't tell anyone. It just is going faster than he can stop it. But this means that his work has been successful so far, right? He's been doing his job correctly because everyone wants to come be healed. But that doesn't mean his work isn't suffocating at times. And at this moment, this great crowd surrounds him. He's on his way to heal someone, but this crowd can't let him through. And so in this moment, he becomes overwhelmed. At times, he has to stand on boats. He has to get away. But at this point, he has to go through the crowd. So this large crowd has surrounded him. But something strange happens. Something different happens. Because as he's walking, he feels something. We're told that there's a woman who has this issue of bleeding, and she reaches out and she tries to touch Jesus' garment because she thinks, if I can just touch his clothing, maybe I can be healed. Maybe my suffering of 12 years will come to an end if I can just get to his clothes. That's all she wants. It's just that simple touch. And this time, blood was a big no-no. It was a bad thing. If someone was bleeding for 12 years, they were ritually unclean for 12 years. This means that they were removed from society. And this is probably something to do with menstruation. That's what a lot of scholars believe. This is something that her body's doing that people think is wrong and bad, and so they push her to the side. They isolate her, and she experiences social alienation, all because she's sick. Even in this time, if someone brushed against her in this crowd, they would fear that they would become unclean. To touch her was a problem. And so everyone was probably avoiding her, even her family, her friends, and her very close community. So in this pain, this trauma, this suffering, this death that she's experienced, she's tried to make it better for herself. She's tried to spend money going to all these physicians, and we'd probably call them magicians at this time because they would do these different poultices and they would get dirt and spit and rub it in people's eyes and just hope that something would help. And it was all this kind of guessing game, but she spent all of this money and everything has only gotten worse. She's still sick. She's still bleeding. In her great suffering and in this light of this trauma she holds in her body, this woman reaches out, and she just hopes that if she can touch Jesus, that healing can happen for her life. So she reaches outside of her rights and her social status as a woman, as an unclean woman, and she touches this religious elite male. And whenever she touches the cloak, something happens. She's healed immediately, for the first time in 12 long and painful years. So when this happened, Jesus immediately turns around. And this immediate is an important thing that we've talked about in Mark, because Mark is all about immediately this thing happened, immediately this thing happened. It's like running. If you read Mark, it's like exhausting to read because it's just one thing after another. You're reading it, it's like, did this happen all in like 3 days? Because it feels like that. And so he immediately turns around because he feels that this power has left his body. He's stunned. Something has changed in his body. Something has left him and gone out to someone else. And so stunned, he turns around and asks, "Who touched me?" And the disciples, they're like, "I don't know, Jesus. Who hasn't touched you at this point?" And they're probably like, "Really? Who hasn't touched you in the past week? There's so many people here. We're in this great crowd. I don't know who touched you, Jesus. Why do you think I'm going to know?" But Jesus wants to know because it's important, because he's learned something new about his work. He wants to know who it was that taught him that his power could work in this new way, that it could leave his body even without his permission or without his consent. It just happened. Healing happened without him having to do anything. And this woman, who was probably hoping for a private thing, she's been in isolation and she just is trying to get the garment. She's not even confronting Jesus from the front. She's just trying to get something. She wants a private healing moment. She just wants some relief from all this suffering. But Jesus doesn't allow that to be a private thing. He turns around and he looks for her, and he even asks everyone around, "Who touched me?" When he does this, he must have seemed angry or something seemed off. And I mean, if someone turned around and said, "Who touched me?" I'd probably be like, "Ooh, what happened?" But he does this, and so the woman falls to his feet because she's just so humbled and she's freaked out that something's going to happen, something bad has happened because she did this, because she touched him. And so she's trembling at his feet, just like Jairus did whenever he was pleading for his daughter's life. And when the Syrophoenician woman did it, when she was pleading for her daughter's life, all these people fall at Jesus' feet, kind of scared, hoping that they can heal the people they love. But in this instance, she's hoping they can heal herself. She fears in this moment that this healing she has just experienced will come with some kind of price, that she'll get in trouble, that something bad will happen. But Jesus doesn't respond with anger, which is great because last week he kind of had a snarky reply about the dogs. So Jesus did a better job this week, I think. This time he turns and he looks at this woman and he calls her daughter. And it's interesting because he'll also call Jairus' daughter. But the thing is, the young girl that was on her deathbed was 12 years old. This woman has been suffering for 12 years. He calls both of them daughter, making it personal, private. Like I said last week, he makes it this small, intimate encounter. He takes this busy moment and this busy crowd, all of this stuff going around and this suffocating job he has, and he stops and he has an intimate and personal moment between himself and this newly healed woman. And then Jesus looks at her and he says, "Your faith has made you well." Jesus takes this small private action of touching his garment, this thing she tried to do on the low key that no one would catch or know was happening, and he makes it into this big, huge public thing. "Who touched me?" And then he goes back into this one-on-one relationship. But the thing about this is Jesus doesn't even take ownership of this healing. He doesn't even take credit. He says, "Your faith has made you well." Jesus acknowledges that in this moment, he is merely a witness to the work that's already going on, the healing that this woman reaches out and obtains for herself. If we hear that, that's pretty powerful stuff. That's kind of a crazy notion that we can reach out and heal ourselves. It's not just Jesus who can do this healing work. But I think the story teaches us something important. It teaches us about witnessing someone's suffering, but also witnessing their healing. And I think that is what the real miracle is here, is witnessing to someone's pain and seeing them experience resurrection through all these little deaths in their lives as well. As I sat with this story and I thought about her reaching out to Jesus, I wondered how many other people she had reached out to before Jesus was the one she caught. Apparently it was several doctors, maybe it was friends, maybe it was a ton of people for 12 years. no one could help her. It took 12 years for someone to see her pain and respond to it in a way that promoted healing for her. But it's interesting because Jesus didn't really heal her per se. It almost seems like she had to heal herself in this moment. Jesus is merely the witness and not the healer. So returning back to Jonathan's question about the end of the world and how we experience that and how we respond to that and what we do to prepare our hearts for the end, for these deaths, I think about this idea of witnessing that Jesus does in this story. In the face of extreme suffering and pain and all these small deaths that we experience throughout our lives, how do we respond to one another in a way that promotes healing? I believe we're called to witness to other people's trauma. I think we're supposed to sit with people's stories and help them own them in a new way. I think all stories are sacred, so when someone shares a hard story with us, I think we're called to hold that story with them and to stay in that sacred space with them and help them find healing. But I also think we have a job as people of faith, particularly of a Christian background. We have all these sacred stories that we can rely back on, that we can turn to and remember, that we can teach and we can remind ourselves and each other that after death comes resurrection and new life. That Jesus' story doesn't end at the cross, that there's a resurrection that's on the other side. All these other stories we've heard, it doesn't end at death. There's always something else. It never ends with death. And if it ends in death, that's how we know the story is not over. So maybe what we should do this week is hold on to hope. Hold on to these stories of resurrection. Because maybe, like this woman was told, maybe our faith really can make us well. Or at least it can give us the knowledge of a new story, a new script, a new sacred story that we get to partake in. The thing is, we need community to do this. This woman couldn't do it alone in her isolation. She wasn't being healed. So as long as we have people who can witness our sacred stories, the pains and the joys, we need people who can provide healing space for us, who can hold these stories with us. If we can have that, then we can live this new life, this new resurrected life. So our challenge this week is to go out into the world ready to witness to all the healing work that's going on around us, even in the midst of great suffering, even in the light of an apparent, awful, pessimistic question of what do we do if the world is about to end. We go out and we remind people that even if it ends, that resurrection follows. Jesus tells the woman, "Your faith has made you well." May it be so for us as well. Amen.
Well, once again, we're at the end of our time together here. Don't let 12 years of desperation occur before you seek the healing hem of the garment. And then once you've found your healing, be the hem of the garment to those around you this week and for the many years to come. Go in peace. Be God to the world. Amen.